everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on this, what turned out to be a lovely evening, although the sun is setting a little earlier than it has been, sadly. But thank you for being here. My name is Lisa Viscusi. I am the manager of adult learning at the Frick Pittsburgh. And again, I'm so happy that you're all here tonight to be with us and Dr. Glasco. Before the program begins, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The Frick Pittsburgh occupies ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. As a place of history and nature, the Frick recognizes the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions in the formation of collective memory. Land acknowledgements, like historic sites themselves, are exercises in preservation and reconciliation engaged with past, present, and future. So this program tonight with Dr. Glasco is inspired by the Frick's current Romare Bearden exhibition, which is on view in our galleries until September 18th. So you still have time to come and see it if you haven't yet. And the Bearden exhibition is brought to us thanks to the Romare Bearden Foundation in New York City, the Landau Traveling Exhibitions in Los Angeles, and it was curated by for the Frick by my colleague Melanie Groves, manager of exhibitions and registrar, as well as our consulting curator Cecile Shellman. And we are very lucky to have with us tonight Dr. Laurence Glasco to discuss two great artists with deep Pittsburgh connections, August Wilson and Romare Bearden. Also, we will have a Q&A with Dr. Glasco at the end. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, which I see Amanda has enabled. Thank you, Amanda. Also, you can put them in Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of our program. So just a few words about you, Dr. Glasco, and then I'll turn it over to you. Dr. Laurence Glasco is a friend of the Frick and an associate professor of history at the University of Pittsburgh. He has studied the history of Black Pittsburgh for the past decade or so and has researched and narrated a recent exhibition on slavery in early Pittsburgh. A few of his many publications on the history of Black Pittsburgh include the 1940s, The Best of Times, August Wilson, Pittsburgh Places in His Life and Plays, along with Christopher Rawson, Teenie Harris, a biography, and I Can't Take It, August Wilson Leaves Pittsburgh. Those are just a few of the many publications that Dr. Glasco has put out on this subject. He is now finishing up a biography of August Wilson and appears in the PBS documentary on August Wilson. He is also working on a biography of K. Leroy Irvis, the African-American Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. So Dr. Glasco, you can unmute yourself, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. While you're unmuting yourself, I just want to tell you we have people chiming in the chat. Some people are from Pittsburgh, some Wisconsin, New York. We had a California, Omaha, Nebraska. So we've got people from all over who are excited to hear you talk. And so thank you for being here with us. So I'm gonna go and let you do what you need to do, but I'm here. And again, everyone, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Thanks so much.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa. I'm so glad you're here because as you just found out, I need real help in how to run
even though you can't see me and Amanda, we're here for you.
Okay, I need you. Okay, so don't go far. Don't go far. But welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to speak tonight on the relation between August Wilson and Romare Bearden with the theme of a playwright's debt to an artist. I don't know how many playwrights in American history or in world history one can find so closely associated with a painter, someone whose writings so much reflect and are inspired by the insights of a painter, in this case of Romare Bearden. And this influence has been really productive in terms of August Wilson's career. Wilson's career in Pittsburgh, began in Pittsburgh, was really going nowhere. That's why he left the city in frustration at the age of 33 in the 1970s. And he was basically looking around for some way to salvage or start up really his theatrical career. His early plays had not done much at all. He really had written about 4 plays that had really failed to connect with Pittsburgh audiences. His first play that he wrote was called Recycle, left people in Pittsburgh confused and disappointed. It was a complex play. His second play he tried here was called Coldest Day of the Year. It closed after only 1 performance because of bad audience reception and confusion. His third play, Rite of Passage, never even made it on stage because the early rehearsals gave bad feedback. And his fourth effort, The Homecoming, his first play, racially militant play, also was poorly received in Pittsburgh. Vernell Lilly, the city's leading figure in Black theater, concluded at the time that Wilson had no future as a playwright. She thought he had a future as a director, but not as a playwright, that he just didn't have what it took. And in fact, up to that point, she was right. In the mid-1970s, Wilson was still trying desperately to write things that would be of quality, but also would have audience appeal. Sort of in desperation, he turned to a subject that was newly fashionable in the 70s. That was the subject of the Black Cowboy. A book came out by a former Black cowboy, his autobiography of life in the Old West and his efforts as a cowboy, and it sort of caught the fancy of people. So Wilson actually tried then a new play called Black Bart in the Sacred Hills, which was about Black cowboys in the Old West. It was a long satirical poem called, as I say, Black Bart and the Sacred Hills, about this Black cowboy, Black Bart, who cavorts with a zany interracial bunch of characters. It wasn't a very good play, but Wilson's friend Claude Purdy liked the play very much, or the poem. It was still a poem at that time, and invited Wilson to come out and join him in St. Paul, and they would work together to convert this poem into a musical, a satirical musical. So they were hard at work on this conversion process. And just one evening while they were working, Purdy happened to bring out a book that he'd acquired, and he showed it to Wilson. The title of the book was The Art of Romare Bearden, The Prevalence of Ritual. Wilson just casually sat there that evening, leafed through it at Purdy's place, and had an epiphany. It was a mind-changing and career-changing discovery. As he said later, and I'm quoting him here, as he wrote, he said, "In 1977, I made a discovery which changed my life. I discovered the art of Romare Bearden. My friend Claude Purdy had purchased a copy of The Prevalence of Ritual, and one night in the fall of 1977, after dinner and much talk, he laid it open on the table before me. Look at this, he said, look at this. The book lay open on the table, and I looked. And what for me had been so difficult up till now, Bearden made seem so simple, so easy. What I saw was Black life presented on its own terms, on a grand and epic scale, with all its richness and fullness, in a language that was vibrant and which made attendant to everyday life, ennobled it, affirmed its value, and exalted its presence. It was the art of a large and generous spirit that defined not only the character of Black American life, but also its conscience. I don't recall what I said as I looked at it. My response was visceral, however. I was looking at myself in ways I hadn't thought of before and have never ceased to think of since." Well, you can't get much stronger praise and acknowledgement of the influence of anyone than that quotation. And in fact, it was true. Bearden's paintings and his collages, he was a collagist as well, contained multiple figures positioned on the canvas, almost like characters on a theater stage. And they're positioned in a way that invite the playwright, as a viewer, to think about capturing their voices and telling their stories, individually and collectively. And we'll give some examples of that in just a minute. Wilson prized Bearden's focus on places and scenes he was personally familiar with, such as steel workers at his mother's boarding house in Pittsburgh and street crowds outside his studio in Harlem. Bearden's paintings typically contain a mixture of reality and fantasy, but they avoid the sort of improbable characters and absurd settings of Wilson's poem and future musical, Black Bart in the Sacred Hills, about zany cowboys in the Old West, an unusual topic. As Bearden said, quote, "I did not need to go looking for the absurd or the surreal because I have seen these things out of my studio window on 125th Street in Harlem." Such a statement by Bearden told Wilson to forget about black cowboys in the far West and write about real people and real things that he had seen personally in Pittsburgh. And that's what he set out to do. And Wilson gave him the inspiration and gave him a way to think about it. In particular, what Bearden taught Wilson was to focus on aspects of daily life, repeated aspects of life that amount to socially important rituals. And in fact, the book, that's why the book was titled The Prevalence of Ritual, which was the book's subtitle. And his collages, such as baptism, and here I'm going to show a few of these collages. Well, my screen is not advancing. Okay, help.
We will be to the rescue momentarily.
Okay, rescue me. I hit the right arrow and as feared, it didn't advance. Should I hit new share?
No. Just no.
No,
Hold on.
all right, I'll leave it alone.
Okay.
Well, while you're working on that, I'll just keep talking then.
Great. That sounds great.
The title of the book was The Prevalence of Ritual, and the paintings and collages in it are about daily life. And it's about such rituals as baptisms. That was one of the paintings. The funeral, Conjure Woman, about an iconic figure with ties to Africa and the spirit world. In the latter, the Conjure Woman, Bearden had personally known a common woman, a conjure woman, who resided at his grandmother's boarding house in Pittsburgh. Or she lived nearby his grandmother, I should say. And Wilson knew a conjure woman himself, a woman who had, in fact, fascinated him with her practice of sprinkling salt over the threshold of her house, and a woman who really led him to Catholicism and resulted in Wilson becoming a Catholic. Oh, here's some of the images, like baptism. That's a ritual of daily life, you see. Well, it's not advancing. The funeral is another. That's a ritual of daily life that Bearden captures. You can see the people attending the funeral. Conjure Woman is another example of rituals of daily life. This is a highly regarded, respected woman who's in touch with the spirit world.
Dr. Glasgow, I'm happy to advance the slides for you. So you just tell me when you're ready to go.
Yes,
when you're ready to go next. Yeah.
Yes, advance again.
Okay.
And one of the slides that very much interested Wilson and intrigued him was something called The Street, partly because the street had so many figures in it that Wilson would have seen. Street scenes at that time are very different from today. Today, streets are pretty much empty. People get around in automobiles. and people stay home and watch television. In those days, in the 1940s, 50s, and to a considerable extent, even in the 60s, people, especially in Black communities, spent a lot of time outside their apartments. They were on the sidewalk with one another. They were in nightclubs or restaurants, things much more. There's much more social life. Streets were thick with people. And this is really what Bearden portrayed in his painting, The Street, and which became the sort of thing that would have inspired Wilson. Sort of crowded, informal street gatherings that constitute the sort of thing that people gathered there every day. It was a part of daily life, part of a ritual of getting out, walking around, looking at other people. And the figure, the street, captures a diverse group of figures, male and female, young and old, middle class, working class, who fill the windows and sidewalk outside, in this case, in Bearden's case, a Harlem tenement, but in Wilson's case, would have been Center Avenue. And Wilson spent a lot of time walking himself up and down Center Avenue, watching people, listening to them, going into nightclubs, into bars, restaurants, things like that. And each of the figures in the street, they look at you, and it's like they have a story to tell. For example, I hope you can see at the top of the stoop, there's an elderly gentleman with white hair and a neatly trimmed beard leaning weakly on a wrought iron handrail. He looks down pensively, almost inviting us to guess his thoughts. And next to him, a young boy, perhaps the elderly gentleman's recollection of his own youthful self, faces the viewer, and his eyes exude confidence while seeming to pose the question, what will be my future? Next door to this, the old man and the boy, is a minister who's raising his hand in blessing. And one also sees the hands of someone else cradle a baby's head from a second-story window. We see a shirtless young man, perhaps contemplating his future and gazing up at an oversized dove perched on a lintel above him. From a third-story window in the painting, there's a boy with his chin on the windowsill, looking down at the street wistfully, as though wanting to join the action below. And then in the action below on the sidewalk, there's a laborer in overalls standing next to a middle-class gentleman sporting a fedora and top coat, while another well-dressed man doubles over in laughter, perhaps from something said by a companion at his side. The image contains a black cat on the sidewalk who's guarding a partially eaten pizza. Nearby, a blues musician holds his oversized guitar as he walks down the street. And a well-dressed woman with slumped shoulders and a worried expression drapes her arm around the musician's neck, as much for support as affection. The canvas's lower left corner is occupied by 4 men, while at the lower right, a woman with a facial scar on her cheek makes a hand gesture indicating her spiritual power, like she's a conjure woman. And in front of the woman, a man's oversized face, seemingly only inches from the viewer, stares threateningly, while off in the distance, a boy sits on the steps of a large elevated bridge going nowhere, or perhaps going to a better future. But this painting is typical of things that Bearden did that inspired Wilson. All of these could be seen in that book about the rituals of daily life. And viewed collectively, the painting's figures are positioned as though they're on the set of a play. That whole Center Avenue is like the set for a play with characters who are there. And the characters are looking at you like they're looking at an audience. And they're depicted in sharp detail, looking straight into the viewer's eyes and physically and emotionally engaging with each other and with the viewer. So there's something theatrical, in a way, about Bearden's paintings. Wilson said, quote, "The figures burst upon you, people, faces, eyes, going in every direction, tenement windows not quite concealing still other faces." He talked about the energy and diversity and humanity of the figures, which caused the viewer to speculate about their life stories, you see. And this gave Wilson like the incentive to take people he had seen on Center Avenue and sort of look them in the eye as they looked him in the eye. And he'd ask them to talk. And he would record what they had to say or what he imagined they had to say. And a lot of this was based on the fact that Wilson himself had spent a lot of time walking Center Avenue, observing people just like this, and listening to what they had to say, listening in on their conversations. Wilson himself had a photographic memory that he could remember things in great detail, even including the gestures that people made as they talked. And he'd use this sort of thing later in his plays. The street also depicts a set of people who've come together to form a community, one that's peaceful and positive. Wilson appreciated that similar scenes could be found in Pittsburgh and really throughout urban Black America. Bearden used objects in his paintings as well, turning them into collages. Go to the next slide.
Dr. Glasgow, before we do, we did have a question that pertained to what you were just discussing.
Yeah, sure.
The question is, why is it mostly men in this collage?
That's a good question. There are women in there, but it is mostly men. Often the streets were, in those days, kind of dominated by men. Women were more likely to stay home. You didn't want to be a woman of the street, somebody out constantly walking up and down the street. People would wonder why. So I think the streets actually were more a male space in terms of people standing there, smoking cigarettes, talking. A woman who stood on the sidewalk on the street, smoking, talking, hanging out, might project a bad impression of what she had in mind, why she was doing that. Was she a prostitute or something like that? So I think that's just my guess as to why it's more a male in these paintings. I think the streets in those days were more male dominated in terms of people's presence. Here is a picture again. You can see how look at the eyes of the people in this painting, how close they are to you, how they're like on a stage, really, in which you are looking at them and they're just about to say something, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're about to say something with their eyes, with their look. It raises the question: what are they thinking? What are they ready to say, perhaps? And it's a sort of thing that invited someone like a Wilson as a playwright to put words in their mouths. So one of the techniques he developed was he would start with an image of characters and then imagine what they were saying individually to the viewer, to the person who was there near them, or what they were saying to each other, what they were thinking to themselves. And you can see in this painting, it's like the images there, those eyes raise the question: what are these boys thinking about? What's going through their mind at the time? And it gave Wilson an inspiration for this sort of dialogue. He had images like this, real life images, and Bearden gave him a way of really making them characters in his plays, or inspiration for characters in his plays. I could have the next slide. Again, this scenes of daily life, rituals of daily life. This is from Romare Bearden, when he was a young man, spent his summers in Pittsburgh with his grandparents, who ran a boarding house for Black steelworkers down in the Strip District. People who worked there around the 32nd block of what is that? Is that Liberty Avenue or Penn Avenue that runs out through the Strip District into Lawrenceville? Anyway, his grandmother ran a rooming house for Black puddlers and iron workers in the 1910s and 1920s, and Bearden would spend his summers with them. And this was a scene that he had sort of seen in her house there. It's of a puddler, an iron worker, coming down the steps in the morning, getting ready to grasp his lunch pail. That's that thermos bottle on the table. Notice the size of his hands, these big hands, which impressed Wilson. These men were powerful men, and that power is indicated by the size of that hand that's going to pick up the lunch bucket and take it on his way to work. This became the inspiration. It's called Milhand's Lunch Bucket, but it became the inspiration for Wilson's play, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, about this man who comes to Pittsburgh looking for his wife. He's an outsider. He's lonely. His wife has left him while he was on a chain gang down in Tennessee on the Mississippi River. And he's looking forward to reunite, things like that. And he's feeling lost, especially when she comes in the play and tells him she left him because she couldn't wait any longer. He was on the chain gang for like 7 years. And Wilson got the idea for this Joe Turner, this outsider man, from the fellow you can see who's seated in front of that table. He's slumped over. It's like he's depressed. He's not talking to anyone. He has his hat on. He's just sitting there with a slumped shoulder, and that became Wilson's the main character then for Joe Turner's. This man represents Joe Turner, this man who's looking for his identity, looking to establish contact and friendships and the like. Well, we got a question here. Oh, flip the question back on the screen. It left before I could read it.
Were you talking about the one in the chat?
Yeah, I don't know. Some question came up in black and white on my screen, at least.
I don't see a question.
Okay.
I will look for it. So you can go ahead.
I'll go ahead. So that's how it became part of a Wilson play, how a Bearden painting inspired him. In this case, what he did was he didn't look at the main subject of the painting. He looked for a figure of secondary importance and elevated him. Figured he was, because Wilson was always interested in the outsider, the loner. Wilson thought of himself and was really a loner and an outsider in many ways. The way he grew up, he was biracial, so he didn't quite fit in. His father was German immigrant. His mother was a Black woman from North Carolina. So he wasn't your usual typical resident of the Hill District. He was light-skinned, so he didn't quite fit in with darker-skinned kids. And at school, they used to chase him home from school, things like that, call him Cracker and stuff. So he had this sense of the outsider, and that's what this fellow in the painting, the one there who's slump-shouldered and kind of bent over, why that attracted him. We can come back to that if people have some questions. I can go on at further length about that. But another example of everyday life, these rituals, one of the things would be a mother teaching her daughter to play the piano, as in Bearden's painting, which was called The Piano Lesson, and that became the title of an actual play that Wilson wrote, called The Piano Lesson, about a woman, a mother who teaches her daughter how to play this piano that's a prized family heirloom that had been carved and decorated by their ancestors back in slavery times. And she was trying to preserve this piano from her brother, who also has claims to it because he's part of the family, who wants to sell it make some money and use that to buy a plantation back down in Mississippi. But that was, here's another example of Wilson taking one of these rituals of daily life, playing the piano, what a piano might mean to someone in another context, and making that the subject of a play. These are not subjects of strange people doing unusual things or something necessarily dramatic, something very theatrical, you might say. These are just rituals of daily life that become the inspiration for Bearden's paintings and for Wilson's plays. Okay, the next one. Okay, backyard. Not to get bogged down on this one, but again, just picking, people are spending time outside their homes, in their backyard. In Seven Guitars, they're out there in the backyard playing cards. That became the setting for a group of people, neighbors and the like, who are participating, coming together as a sort of community in their backyard. Okay, next image. Saturday evening. Well, of course, that's a ritual, something that happens every Saturday, where people really go out, where the streets are very crowded. One Saturday evening, Wilson talks about, he was on Center Avenue, which is the main street in the Hill District, and there were like hundreds of people out on the street that evening, and he thought maybe somebody had been shot. Why were there so many people out? And he walked up, and they were out because they were standing outside a nightclub listening to John Coltrane play. And Wilson went up to them and said, "Why are you? What's going on? Why are you here?" And they all shushed him, like, be quiet, man. We're here listening to some good music." They didn't have money to pay to get in the nightclub, so they were standing outside. These are some of the things that Wilson observed, these sorts of rituals that brought people together in a sense of community. Okay, the next image. The Dove. This is a painting, a Bearden painting of, again, tenement life in the city. People, you can see it's crowded with people there on the sidewalk, sitting outside. These are not people who are walking up and down the street. And there are more women in this picture, because that's sort of almost like a family scene, you see, where the women are seated outside, chatting with one another. But you have men as well, and women. And above it all is this dove. And that was a thing that Bearden was always attracted to, the small character off to the side, sort of like the fellow, the mill worker there, the hunch-shouldered mill worker that Wilson made the subject of his play, Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And this dove is like that spirit that's out there that people aren't paying particular attention to, but that represents the spirit of the community, of people, of peace, and a sense of community. Okay, next image. Return of the Prodigal Son. Again, that's a sort of a ritual. Boys go off, sow their wild oats, perhaps, then return. This itself, and how they're received, how they are or are not accepted back into the family, back into the community, is something that Bearden was interested in exploring visually, and Wilson did that in his plays. If you see a play like Jitney, where you have the son, Booster, comes back. He's just released from prison, from a 20-year prison sentence where he had been sent for murdering his girlfriend, who had betrayed him and the like. And Booster is like the prodigal son. His father, Becker, the owner of the station, won't accept him back. Becker has no use for him, thinks he's disgraced his family and ruined his life and really committed something very wrong. And Booster's mother, who might well have accepted him back, she had died she just took sick and depression when he was sentenced to a life term in prison. and she just got depressed and died. And so his father won't accept him as the prodigal son, but ultimately they do reconcile. So this is a theme that appears in Bearden's paintings, and it's a sort of theme that Wilson explored in his plays. Okay, next image. Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was another theme. Of course, this isn't a ritual of daily life, but it was something that Wilson picked up on and portrayed in his play King Hedley II, which is about the death of Aunt Esther, who's the conjure woman, the center of the morality and history and ethics of the Hill District, the woman who represents that. She has died, and with her death, that symbolized the loss of this binding force for good and ethics and stuff had passed, and led to the sort of chaos and moral decay and violence and drug use and depression that characterized the 1980s. Really, Wilson's portrait of the 1980s, and King Hedley II was the play, is really about Sodom and Gomorrah, a time that the mills, this is a time that the mills closed, and vast, deep unemployment caused a lot of chaos and turmoil and violence and guns and drug usage and abortion and all sorts of things in the Black community in that period. So again, here is something from Bearden that would have inspired a sort of theme from Wilson. Okay, the next image. Well, here is I've got this mislabeled. It's not King Hedley II. I don't know how I put that title on. These are jazz musicians, as you can see, playing the guitar, playing the piano, the trumpet, drums, and things. And Wilson features in like in Seven Guitars, Floyd Schoolboy Barton is trying to reignite his career as a blues musician, sings, plays the guitar, and the like. Okay, next image. Again, this is another image of the street. This is the image that Wilson would have seen in that book on the rituals of daily life. The image was in black and white at the time. Bearden did it in color, actually, originally, but when it was reproduced in the book, it came out in black and white. So this is the same image that we've gone over before. So next image. Again, Empress of the Blues, but this is really the piano lesson. I apologize. I put these slides together too fast this afternoon and got the wrong titles. This is really the piano lesson. I had another one that Wilson had used that was really about the inspiration for Ma Rainey, of a Black female blues singer. Again, the folk musicians, this would be like Floyd Schoolboy Barton in Seven Guitars, who's trying to reach fame as a guitarist. Okay, next image. Again, about the blues. Wilson said that he had been the four biggest influences on his career, what he called the four B's. That was the blues, Baraka, Bearden, and the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. And so Wilson does have quite a few images that are inspired by Bearden's paintings of the blues or blues musicians. Again, you can see these are, one thing you notice is that these are not images of violence, of disorder. Their sense of community. People are quiet in the paintings. They're kind of in their own heads, thoughtful, about ready to say something if you'd only ask them. And so that was the sort of thing that really attracted Wilson. Okay, let me go on to some of the other aspects of Bearden that attracted Wilson. One was that Bearden's paintings, as you could see in most of these, they have a sense of the tragic to them. The figures seldom smile. It's like their eyes have seen things that they should not have had to witness. But they're the eyes of people who've survived with their humanity intact. And they've survived in a way that transcends race and links them with the rest of mankind. Wilson, like Bearden, valued the uniqueness of the Black experience, but he also considered it part of the broader human experience. As he often said, quote, "There is no idea that cannot be contained by Black life." So he was interested in the uniqueness of Black life, but out of that uniqueness, there was a certain universal aspect to it that one could find in the lives of others of different races and nationalities and backgrounds as well. But these all became part of Wilson's paintings. Wilson's theater, based on these paintings. Let me just say that all of this, these and other examples of this depiction of daily life up close in a theatrical way, led to Wilson's enormous success. The first play he wrote after he saw Jitney was one he consciously made very much a Pittsburgh institution, of something that he was very familiar with, and that was the play called Jitney, about those unlicensed gypsy taxi cabs that were a deep and important part of life in the Hill District. And that was his first play after Bearden, and it was his first dramatically successful play. It became part of the of what's called his century cycle, or his Pittsburgh cycle of plays, and it was his first one, and it provided the template for all the other plays. He was so happy. Blacks in Pittsburgh flocked. It premiered in Pittsburgh, and folks in the Hill District flocked to the play to see a presentation on an institution that they were familiar with, that meant so much to their lives, and featured people that the sort of people they knew, because people had favorite Jitney drivers. They wouldn't just, when they'd call to make a reservation, or if somebody picked them up, they often would give the name of the person they wanted to pick them up. They developed personal relationships with these drivers. So Jitneys were really a part of Black Pittsburgh daily life. It was ingrained in the local culture, and it was just the sort of thing that an exposure to somebody like Bearden's paintings would lead to. Wilson had spent many days sitting in Jitney stations, listening to what guys were talking about there, and watching the dynamics of how they interacted. And one of his close friends, Salahuddin, who is a leader now, he's head of the Pittsburgh Board of Education. Salahuddin was a good friend of Wilson's, and he went with him to this Jitney station many times. And Salah told me, man, it was strange, but I went with Wilson to the Jitney station about as often as Wilson went, but I never saw anything in there that was worthy of a play. But Wilson did. And one of the reasons is that Wilson had seen the paintings by Bearden and realized that these sorts of things that people think are so normal and ordinary, that they're not the stuff of theater or poetry or something like that. That was part of the insight that Bearden gave him, that he could take these things he had seen. And remember, I said he had a photographic memory. He could remember literally virtually everything he saw, repeat conversations, and even do so with the gestures that people used when they said a certain thing. One of the lines in fences. If people remember that, probably I think the most famous exchange in the play Fences is when this father and son are having this argument, and the boy says, how come you ain't never liked me? And the father blows up and says, who says I gotta like you? When I married your mama, that wasn't part of the deal. And he said, you know, I put food on your table, I put clothes on your back, shoes on your feet. I don't do that because I like you. I do that because it's my duty, it's my responsibility. Well, I talked to one of August Wilson's girlfriends, and she said they actually heard practically that same conversation, word for word, while they were walking up Center Avenue one afternoon. It came out the window of this father and son having an argument just like that. So August was able, once he got the idea from Bearden, to look for these and think about these daily life examples of behavior. He could just rummage through his memory bank, pull these out, and convert them into theater. He could get these people to talk. One of his friends, Rob Penny, he had asked Rob, this is before he met Bearden, he had said, how do you get your characters to talk? And Penny said, you don't get them to talk. You don't put words in their mouth. You listen to them. Well, Wilson heard that, but he never did it until he saw the example of Bearden's theater. And the combination of what Rob Penny had told him, you listen to your characters, which means let them talk, and Bearden's paintings, which were images of people up close who looked like they were ready to talk, to say something, really set Wilson off and let him do the sorts of plays that have made him famous, that have really enthralled audiences in the United States and abroad, because they deal with, again, rituals of daily life. Everybody, every culture, every people have those rituals. They may not be the same rituals, but they have their own rituals, and they can recognize them. And many of them are, while they superficially look very different, at a certain level, they are very similar. So I'll stop at that point. There's much more that can be said, but maybe we can get some questions and get to the topics that way. So I want to thank Lisa for advancing those pictures, because they weren't advancing for me.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It worked out. We did it. So I'm going to encourage everybody, I know there are already a couple questions, which I'll ask, but if you have any more, we do have some time for more questions. You can put those in the chat or the Q&A. So just to start, while you were talking about Bearden at one point, somebody asked if he was self-taught. So maybe you could give a little bit of information on his career.
Bearden was pretty much self-taught, but he did take some formal courses in Boston, I believe. But largely, he developed his skills as a painter on his own. But he was very well read and studied painting. So he was self-taught in that way. He wasn't a naive painter. He was aware of art that was being done in Europe. Certainly the idea of the collage, he was aware of that. You could see a lot of cubism in his paintings, the breaking up of figures and planes and spaces. So he was very aware of that. As I say, he was aware of the collage from Europe. And he was very well read as well. Mm-hmm. He came from a very well-off family in North Carolina. So he was well educated. He originally was going to be a mathematician, but then later switched into art.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We also had somebody ask, and you actually addressed part of it. Why are many of the pictures you're showing in black and white? And I think you did say that this is how Wilson would have seen them in the prevalence of
ritual.
Right?
Yes, in the book, I looked at the actual book that Wilson had been inspired by. If you look at some catalogs where the same paintings originally had been reproduced before they went into the book, they're in color. So a
Right.
number of these I could have shown in color, but I wanted to give more an idea of what Wilson saw. And those were mainly in black and white.
I'll say that seeing some of those in black and white and you describing what was in there, you see it a little bit differently when it's not in color, actually. And it was interesting to think of it as Wilson seeing it that way and still being inspired by what he saw.
Yes, I think they have the black and white gives them actually more a tragic feel, a melancholy feel at least. And Wilson's plays were all tragedies. They
Right.
were all that was his view of life, that life has certain humor, life has good times, but fundamentally life is tragic. Fundamentally, we're all outsiders trying to navigate a tough world, urban world. The city streets are not welcoming streets. They're not like,
Right.
he sort of romanticized, some people didn't like this, the South, that blacks probably made a mistake migrating to the North, away from the land and the nature of this that they were used to in the South, and coming to the hard concrete streets of the North. And that those streets create a certain sadness because life is tough, and they're outsiders. They're migrants. Okay, they're newcomers trying to adjust to life in the city, and that's the sort of characters he portrays in his plays. And it's the sort of, it really is Wilson's personality as well. You know,
Yeah.
people often write about themselves in a way, things that they see deeply. Yeah.
There's a question here. Did Bearden and Wilson ever meet?
Oh, that's a good question. No, they never met. It's really one of the sad things, and Wilson so regrets. He was so in awe of Bearden. Bearden, he went in New York. Bearden had a studio down in Lower Manhattan, and Wilson said he walked up to the studio door once, but he didn't have the courage to knock. And he always wonders if he had knocked and Bearden had answered, what he would have said. And Wilson said, I'm not sure what I would have said, but I probably would have taken my hat off to him, and as an acknowledgement of his importance and how much he meant to me. So it really was
so close. He was so close.
Wilson was a very shy person. He was very diffident, standing back. I taught in the history department at the University of Pittsburgh, and Wilson used to hang out in Black Studies, which was just across the hall from us. And I spent a lot of time over in Black Studies. And you know, I don't remember ever meeting Wilson. And I talked to some people, and they said, yes, he was there, but he was always quiet. He'd stand in the background and you wouldn't see him. But they said he would see you. They said he knew you were there, but he himself just had this ability to make himself invisible almost.
He was ever observing, I suppose.
He was observing.
Right?
Yes, that's what they said. They said you wouldn't have noticed him, but he would have noticed you.
And put you in one of his plays, maybe?
Well, I hope not. No.
We have a question here. Why did Romare Bearden attend school in Pittsburgh during 4th grade and 11th and 12th grades instead of in New York City?
His family had moved to New York, and they in the summers, his mother worked. She worked for the Chicago Defender newspaper, and I forget what his father did, but they were both very professional and had busy lives. And so in the summer, their lives got even more busy with more obligations. And just to give him a chance to be out of the city, such a big city as Manhattan as well, they would send him to spend the summer with his grandparents in Pittsburgh. And a couple of years he spent the whole year here, went to Peabody High School. So he had both, and they liked that he got to see the big city, but also was exposed to a place like Pittsburgh.
Yeah. I just want to tell you in the Q&A here, I think there were 7 people who asked if they'd ever met. So you answered all of their questions in one.
Oh, okay.
People were very interested in that. And I want to say, Amanda, if you see a question that I'm missing and you want to pose it, just let me know or come back on screen. So here, let's see. Are there any buildings in Pittsburgh that still exist that would have been meaningful to Bearden during his time here?
Oh, yes, his grandmother's boarding house still stands down in the Strip District. I've been by there. Geez, I can't recall offhand the actual address, but it's still there. There are row houses there. They've been nicely maintained. I stopped once and knocked on a door, and the person who answered the door, I asked if they knew anything about August Wilson or Romare Bearden. They didn't know. They hadn't lived there. They were newcomers in that house. So it would be fun just to trek up and down the street maybe and find there might be somebody there who personally had known Bearden when he lived there. In that time.
Speaking of location, which to that question, someone's asking, are the locations of Bearden's paintings well documented? So I guess where they live now, where the paintings are, and do they ever find new ones?
Well, a lot of his paintings, he says, were things that he observed outside his studio from his window. He would look down and sort of like Wilson, but Wilson would get out and walk the streets. Bearden would sort of look out the window down on the street and paint scenes that he had seen.
I want to point out, someone had asked about does Jitney get performed or produced often? And Amanda, thank you, Amanda, posted in the chat that Pittsburgh Playwrights is currently presenting Jitney in the backyard of the August Wilson House. And the link, it's through September 18th, so another 11 days. So the link is in here, but you can also visit pittsburghplaywrights.org or search for the August Wilson House, and you'll be able to find that information.
Yes, I'm taking my class to see it on the 15th.
Okay.
So the whole class.
That's a good field trip.
And they will get to tour. The Wilson House has now been restored and opened, and they'll get to tour the house as well. So it'll be a double treat for the class.
If anyone has not heard, they did have their opening recently, and Denzel Washington was in town. It was a big exciting thing. So you could probably find some information on that event. It was very well attended, and I think a really exciting time. They've been waiting to open this house in a renewed way. So let's see, we can do a couple more questions. Could you address or talk about the role of Black artists that these men found important? Oh, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I think what it's asking is what issues of Black American men did both of these artists sort of address in their work?
Well, both of them were interested in showing the sense of community that persisted despite all the things that were bad, all the obstacles and the disappointments, that people still created a meaningful life, one that gave satisfaction, that was quiet. You notice no one is, in the Bearden paintings, these are not well-off people, but neither are they down and out people. They look, their eyes have a sadness. They've seen things and experienced things they shouldn't have had to, but they're going on and they have something to say. And I think the implication is they have things to say that we should listen to. And Wilson was able to take that inspiration from Bearden and
Mhm.
not put words in their mouth, but get
Right.
them to talk, to tell
Yeah.
us. We see these Bearden-like figures begin to speak
Hmm.
to us. And that's what's the beauty of having these two men together. Wilson's figures really are Bearden's figures. They're Bearden's sorts of people, and they're talking to us, and we get a sense of what they're thinking, what their dreams are, what their hopes are, what their disappointments have been, and the like. So that's
Yeah.
really the beauty of the two coming together, of the artist shows us one thing of how to visualize it, and the other shows us how to hear what they have to say.
Hmm. I think it's intriguing that, and we keep sort of talking about this, but that they never met, and their work is in such conversation,
Yes.
in so many ways.
Thanks
I think
yes, their
that,
work is in conversation. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yes.
Um, I'm going to ask one more question. We're at 8 o'clock, so we're doing well. Actually someone asked this, or two different people asked this question. Have any stage productions of Wilson's plays made use of Bearden's imagery for set designs?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, let me think now. Uh, Certainly the piano lesson,
Mm-hmm.
that would be one. The piano lesson, 7 guitars, the idea of those people playing music in the backyard. They're performing in their yard. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Bearden's has many paintings of people in their yards. Let's see. And of course the play Jitney. And the Pittsburgh playwrights did the play. I saw it years ago, and they had an automobile on the stage, or part of an automobile,
Yeah.
the front half of an automobile on the stage, which was great. So yes, there are scenes in the play that resemble things that come from Bearden.
From the work. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I think, unless there's a last minute quick question, I feel like we're good. We've people are saying thank you. And we've also had a couple of people say they missed the beginning. Their recording of your talk, Dr. Glasco, will be available on the Frick's YouTube page, so you can see it again if you missed anything, or just listen again, because there was so much great information. I know I said this at the very beginning, but Dr. Glasgow, thank you truly for being a friend of the Fricks. We are lucky to know you, and you had a big following today from all over the place. So we're really happy that you spent this time with us, and that this show was here so that you could talk about it.
Oh, good. It gives me a lot of satisfaction. I've enjoyed and really appreciate all that the Frick is doing. It's just really remarkable and very encouraging and exciting. Their turn to include the African American experience in their programming, and
Yes.
tying it in such a beautiful way. And they've done such an excellent job of interpreting that experience and the art around it. So
thank you so much. We're happy to hear it, and I'll pass that on to all my colleagues if they're not here with us. They'll appreciate it, especially coming from you. So I want to thank everybody who is with us and who stayed with us. We're glad that you're a part of the Frick now too, if you haven't been before. We've got lots of other great things going on, and our next exhibition coming up. So please join us again and visit us again. And we're happy to have had you tonight. So again, Dr. Glasgow, thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for handling the technology.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for.